Hey everyone, this is Nick, and please send news. News, I said, news. As per the news I can send your way, this week we have a new law in the EU called the Cyber Resilience Act, which might spell the doom of a lot of open source projects. We also have big performance boosts for Intel GPU users, whether they're using ARC GPUs or integrated GPUs, and we have a bunch of repairable and ethical laptops. And we also have this message from our sponsor. This video is sponsored by Squarespace, and most of you probably already know about it, but if you don't, all you have to remember is that it's your all-in-one solution to build and publish your own website. Even if you don't know anything about how to build a website and you don't know how to code, Squarespace just lets you get started in no time. You pick a template, you drag and drop the various blocks you want, you customize them with the various colors and themes, and you're good to go. And when you want to move forward and enrich your website with a bunch of other features, you can add a video gallery, an online store with online payments, or even a members-only area, and a lot more. And if you need a logo or you need a domain name, Squarespace can also help you with that. So if you need a new website and you don't know how to get started, just click the link in the description below or head over to squarespace.com/thelinuxexperiment and you'll get 10% off your first purchase. While the EU can be pretty good at making sure big tech doesn't overstep their bounds, especially in the privacy department, sometimes they completely miss the mark, and it looks like their recent Cyber Resilience Act is part of the latter group of laws. This set of regulations aims to make software more secure by having software developers write complete documentation and follow a process to be certified, with a bunch of good practices regarding how they handle and triage bugs and how they fix their security issues. For more important software like firewalls, an audit by a regulated body will also be necessary to be certified. And on paper, this sounds pretty good. Companies that want to implement a specific piece of software or buy a software solution will be able to know if this thing is relatively secure and well maintained. But for open source software, it might be a nightmare. Because this new Cyber Resilience Act, or CRA, treats most open source software just like commercial proprietary code. The only exception being if the project has a fully decentralized development model with fully unpaid volunteers. As long as you have employees of any company contributing to a project, it will be subject to the new regulations, even if the company that employs them has nothing to do with software or the project itself. The example the Apache Software Foundation gives is that of an airline pilot that also writes code on their free time, while every single one of their contributions would be considered a commercial contribution because they are employed by a corporate entity, even though the airline has nothing to do with the code or the project. This means that either open source projects have to take on a heavy, costly burden of certification and audits, or they have to boot any contributor that isn't an unpaid volunteer that has no other job. They would also have to refuse any donation from a commercial entity, as this would classify their project as commercial as well. On top of that, some of the obligations specified in the CRA are impossible to fulfill, like the obligation to deliver a project without any known exploitable vulnerabilities. It basically imposes liability on open source developers when the very nature of open source, as defined in most licenses, is that the code is provided as is, without any warranty or liability. And the CRA also calls to a bunch of to-be-defined standards, which will be written by organizations that sometimes don't even allow open source organizations to be members. Entities that don't conform to the regulation could face fines up to 15 million euros. And this thing was adopted this week. It's gonna move on to the next step of voting a EU law. They made a few amendments for open source, but it doesn't remove the burden of certification and the classification as a commercial project whenever you have a contributor employed by any company or you're receiving money from any commercial entity. So basically, this might completely destroy the open source ecosystem in the EU, or even make software developers that make open source code refuse to distribute their stuff in the EU as well. Now, the Framework laptop 16-inch is now available for pre-orders, and if you're not familiar with Framework or if you're wondering why I'm even talking about it here, It's because it's a project that's very close to the ideals of open source and free software. They are laptops that you can entirely disassemble yourself, that are upgradable entirely, and designed to be repairable. The 16-inch model is also pretty special, since it will let you completely change how the keyboard works, with the ability to add or remove the numpad easily, or to move where the touchpad is, centered or not. It also has access to GPU modules you can slot in the laptop to give it some extra power. The base model starts at 1579 euros if you're willing to build it yourself, or 1919 euros if you want it pre-built. It comes with either a Ryzen 7 7840HS or a 7940HS, both very powerful CPUs, 16 gigs of RAM at least, and 512 gigs of storage at least. It ships with Windows pre-installed, but Framework has good Linux support as well. The GPU module will cost you 450 euros for a Radeon RX 7700S, which should be pretty much enough for any graphical intensive task. And you get the usual set of port modules to change the I/O of your laptop. It really looks like a fantastic concept, and if Framework can actually manage to deliver newer GPUs that you can actually slot in, or even other alternative modules for that slot, like extra battery, then it could be a truly special laptop. I asked them for a review unit, and they said they would look at the available inventory and check if they can send me one or not, so fingers crossed. And speaking about repairable tech, it looks like Lenovo has a similar project in the works. It's called the Aurora project, and it's basically a laptop that could be disassembled without using a screwdriver at all. The keyboard plate would be removable without screws, the battery would be modular, and the components upgradable. Basically, just like the Framework laptop, but even easier to disassemble. It's still a concept, it's in the prototype phase for now, but it would be a huge step to have a big manufacturer take right to repair seriously. The Aurora project would be a ThinkPad, basically, which will be sure to please a lot of Linux users who generally regard ThinkPads as one of the best line of devices to run Linux. I don't personally know how, because they look terrible, they're super big, and they're generally not better built anymore than anything else, but I guess the brand still has some cachet. Looks like Lenovo also based this design on a bit of research, as they found that 20% of consumers would like to have a do-it-yourself option for repairs. They're looking at the components that need to be repaired the most, and at the components that should be easily accessible, and they're designing the laptop around this, which sounds like a good way to approach things. They're also looking at ways some parts that aren't used anymore could be repurposed in other devices, like an unused laptop display becoming a smart screen. It is always good to see big-name manufacturers take right to repair seriously and working on upgradable and repairable devices. Not only does it create less e-waste, but it also gives you, the user and the customer, more control over the devices you own, which is always good. Now, the KDE team shared a bunch of features that landed in Plasma 6. First, there's now a keyboard shortcut to change the power profile of your device. It's Meta plus B by default, and you'll get a nice on-screen display element to show you which profile you move to. The Wi-Fi applet will now prompt you to log in when using a network with a captive portal, like on an airport Wi-Fi network, for example. Dolphin, Firelight, and the Disks widget will now follow the user's choice of binary units, whether you prefer, for example, kilobytes or kibibytes. That setting is still hidden for now in a config file, but it will have a GUI for Plasma 6. Plasma will also play a sound when plugging or unplugging a USB device, although if this annoys you, you'll be able to disable that. And Plasma 6 will be able to play free desktop-compatible sound themes, which goes hand in hand with their goal to have a completely revamped default sound theme as well. 138 bugs were also fixed over the past 2 weeks, most of which should land in Plasma 5.27 and the current version of the KDE frameworks. I get the feeling that Plasma 6 will not woo anyone with new features or a new look, but it will definitely be the best Plasma version ever, because they're not rebuilding everything from the ground up, they're just building up on top of 5.27, which already had received a lot of attention for bug fixes, stability, and just general polish. Now, it looks like Meta's latest data collection vessel isn't really working out, as it turns out. Threads, their Twitter competitor, grew very fast to 49 million users, but that number was already slashed by more than 2 after a week. They now have about 24 million users. And if you're thinking, that's normal, people just wanted to play around with the app and they decided to abandon it, know that it's not. Such a huge app from a huge company should see user numbers grow all the time, especially in the few weeks after a launch. The number of new users should more than offset the numbers of users leaving the platform. Now still, Threads currently sits at about 22% of Twitter's audience in terms of daily active users, which is a big threat for the blue bird, and way more than what Mastodon currently achieves, unfortunately, at 3.6 million daily active users. Engagement on Threads also went down from 21 minutes per day to 6 minutes, which means people spend very little time on the app compared to even Twitter, where people spend 25 minutes on average. Threads isn't available in the EU just yet. Maybe it will pick up some steam once it's actually available there. If that happens, as it would mean Meta would have to relinquish a lot of its data collection practices to access about 500 million more potential users. Although I seriously hope Threads crashes and burns. I don't necessarily think that Meta joining the Fediverse is a terrible thing. Worst case scenario, we defederate them, we keep the Fediverse as is, and Meta has its own ActivityPub enabled service that connects to virtually nothing, and that's that. But I firmly believe that social media should not be owned by money-grubbing, data-collecting giant corporations like Meta, so I do not want the next big social media success to be from them. Okay, let's wrap this up with the gaming news. First, for Intel users, there are good news. The Linux drivers will enjoy around 10% more speed in the next release of Mesa. For Arc users, developers enabled L3 partial right merging, which I have no idea what this is, but they noted an 11% improvement in CSGO FPS and 5.5% in Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Phoronix benchmarked a bunch of titles, and they confirmed that these new drivers will definitely give vastly better performance, 10% on average. And as per integrated Intel graphics, there's also a patch coming that will provide a small FPS boost in a lot of games, and a big FPS boost in a handful of titles, notably Strange Brigade, up to 10% as well, although the improvement won't be as notable in every game compared to the Arc FPS boost. And I always felt Arc GPUs might be a good choice for Linux, because Intel generally has pretty good Linux drivers that are mainly open source, but also the problems people had with Arc GPUs on Windows were that these GPUs don't really have good compatibility for older versions of DirectX, which doesn't matter for us because the GPU never runs DirectX, it only runs Vulkan, it runs DirectX translated into Vulkan. So at some point I might have to buy an Arc GPU and make a few performance comparisons between Windows and Linux. Wine 8.13 was also released with 64-bit support added in the Wine version of GStreamer, the framework that plays all the music and the video in games, plus there are 36 bug fixes, including for League of Legends, Steam, Office 2007, Stalker Call of Pripyat, Total War Shogun 2, or Star Ocean The Last Hope. We also have a new version of Proton 8.0-3, which fixes issues with Battle.net, the EA launcher, and Ubisoft Connect. It also brings up-to-date DXVK and VKD3D, and a bunch more games are now officially playable, including Minecraft Legends, Prop Night, Gunfire Reborn, and more. And finally, we have a new beta of the Steam desktop client with a cool new feature, the ability to see the Steam Deck compatibility information in your game's library. When you turn the option on, and when you hover over a game, you will see the rating icon appear, and it will also be visible in each game's page, in the information section. And speaking about PCs, how about I tell you about our sponsors' computers? Tuxedo makes laptops and desktops that run with Linux out of the box, which makes them an infinitely better choice than anything you might buy that is made to run Windows. Because when you buy a Tuxedo PC, you know that all the components were picked because they support Linux, and if they didn't, Tuxedo developed drivers and upstreamed them so they can work on Linux for everyone. And they have a nice big range of devices that should basically satisfy every price point and every need, whether you're looking for a laptop, an affordable one, or a super high-end workstation replacement or gaming laptop, or whether you're looking for a desktop, a small NUC, or a giant workstation tower. They have everything and everything in the middle. All their devices are heavily customizable, all their laptops are openable, repairable, and upgradable, So yeah, if you need a new device and you want to run Linux on it, and you want to support Linux's development, click the link in the description below and get yourself a computer from Tuxedo. So, thanks everyone for watching the video, I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't hesitate to like, to subscribe, to turn on notifications, to write a comment, and if you didn't like the video, well, you can always dislike it and also tell me why in the comments down there. And if you really enjoy the channel and you want to support it, well, there are plenty of links in the description as well just for that. PayPal, LibraPay, Patreon, YouTube memberships, whatever, you know how this works. So, thanks for watching, and I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!